Mr. Kennedy, let's turn to a question for you here. A lot of this has been about who can be a better senator for Massachusetts. The University of Virginia has ranked all members of Congress for their effectiveness, and during the 115th Congress, you had a lower score than Mr. Markey, and the second lowest score in the Massachusetts congressional delegation. If they think you're not being effective in your current job, why should you get a promotion?
Ted, so a couple things. One, trying to pass major pieces of legislation when you've spent the entire time in the minority is more difficult to do in the House of Representatives, which is where I spent my first 3 terms in office. What I will say is there's a difference, though, between your ability to file the right bill and get the vote and understanding the obstacles to change to actually bring about the progressive change that I want to see, which is why I was in nearly 20 states last cycle helping to flip the House. It's why I went campaigning from West Virginia to Indiana to Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, doing exactly what Senator Warren and Senator Sanders have done. Go out there and try to build a movement so that when we actually reclaim the House, not only could you hold this administration accountable through impeachment, but you could cast votes like as an assault or like background checks and campaign finance reform and government reform and the Paycheck Fairness Act and the Equality Act. That's what needs to happen. And the fact is that when you compare my record about going out and actually trying to create the change that is necessary, I was in all those states. Senator Markey was in 0.
But Mr. Kennedy, when you talking to voters as we got ready for this debate, I kept hearing, I'm not exactly sure why Joe Kennedy is running because it seems like they're going to vote the same way on a lot of things. Is there something more concrete you can point to for voters about the difference if they switch senators this fall?
The difference is literally in how we define the job. I believe there's a lot more to this, to being a senator from Massachusetts than just voting the way that you vote and the bills that you cast. And if you want something concrete on that, let's dive into criminal justice. It is not just a question that Senator Markey voted for that crime bill, as we talked about before. And it's not just a question of the fact that he opposed the integration of Boston public schools when he came into office. It's a question of what have you done to actually rectify those decisions after you made them. And the fact is that Senator Markey might be known for several things in office. Criminal justice and racial equity is not one of them.
Let me turn to Mr. Markey. Senator Markey, the Green New Deal has been obviously a major thing you've discussed throughout your campaign. You're co-sponsoring that with Representative Ocasio-Cortez. You'll need Republican support for the Green New Deal to get it through the Senate. You need 60 votes. Out of 250 senators who've served in the last quarter century, the Lugar Center ranks you in the bottom 10 for bipartisan legislation, lower than Elizabeth Warren, lower than Ted Kennedy. Why should voters believe one of the most partisan senators in the nation will be able to get Republicans on board and actually pass the Green New Deal?
Because leadership requires bipartisanship. I have 580 laws on the books, and I needed a Republican every time to get them passed. I'm in the top 5 in the Senate in terms of effectiveness. I took on the oil industry and the auto industry to increase the fuel economy standards of the vehicles in our country. That's the single greatest reduction in greenhouse gases of any law in the history of the world. That's my law. I took on the NRA to ensure that we did not have Chinese assault weapons coming into America, to make sure that the CDC could do, for the first time, the research on the causes of gun violence in our society. They're both laws. They're my laws. I took on Wall Street on insider trading. That is the law that takes on Wall Street. That's my law.
The Green New Deal is at the center of your campaign this year, and you've been the leader now in the last decade or so on 2 the biggest climate bills out there. There was Waxman-Markey, and now there's the Green New Deal. In both cases, as we stand here today, you've not been able to pass those. So why should voters have confidence in a new term you'd actually be able to get a big climate bill across the threat, not just talk about it, but get it into law?
Well, because when the telecommunications giants were monopolies, I broke them up. It's my law that unleashed the broadband revolution in this country. No one had that on the scoreboard. I did that. When Alzheimer's reached a point where 5 million Americans had it, I got the law passed in 2014 so that we would find and fund the cure for Alzheimer's by the year 2025. That is the law right now. And back in 2007 on the fuel economy standards, I had to find a bipartisan way of getting that done, and it passed. And the same thing is true, by the way, for appliance efficiency. The Constitution for appliance efficiency, for the air conditioning in this room, for the heating, for the lighting, that's all my law to reduce dramatically the greenhouse gases. They're all my laws. They all passed. They were all bipartisan because I worked across the aisle to get big things done. The congressman has been in office for 8 years at this point, and we're still waiting for a major piece of legislation to be passed by the congressman that merits his promotion to the United States Senate.
I'll let you respond.
So the senator has a very interesting definition of winning. He said he took on the oil industry. Maybe that's why a board member of ExxonMobil contributed to the senator's campaign, as multiple fossil fuel people involved in the fossil fuel industry continue to do in violation of the senator's own pledge, which he only returns after he is notified about it. He says that he's taken on the gun industry. Senator, 100 people die every single day from gun violence in this country. I am a father of a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. I try to visit preschools for my daughter, and we have to run through active shooter drills for what happens if somebody walks into that school with a gun. That doesn't sound like winning to me. We say that you filed a bill to cure Alzheimer's. That's not how curing Alzheimer's works. If that were the way it works, we could end racism today by filing a bill to end racism. That's not how this is done. This is done by building coalitions and changing minds. And the challenge that the senator has is when it came to his seminal pieces of legislation, that cap and trade bill, they couldn't get it across the finish line because you know who objected to it? Groups like Greenpeace and organized labor, core Democratic constituencies that were not there at the table when they needed to be. And because of that, we are still where we are today, all of these years later, and we still don't have the progress that our generation needs.
Mr. Markey, I'll give you 30 seconds, but then we have to move on.
ExxonMobil bitterly opposes the Green New Deal that Alexandria Ocasio and I have introduced because it's an existential threat to their business model. The NRA, I passed that law just in December, 5 months ago, to have research done at the CDC for the first time in history to find the causes of gun violence in our society. And by the way, on Alzheimer's, the congressman could not be more wrong. Research is medicine's field of dreams from which we harvest the findings that give hope to families that they could find that Alzheimer's ever existed. That's what my program does. It's going to be a $20 to $30 billion program to find the cure for Alzheimer's, and research is the key, as it is in every single disease.
All right.